All right, I just finished, what's it called? Get Back, the new Peter Jackson documentary about the making of the film Let It Be, the earlier documentary about the Beatles. I have a lot to say. I enjoyed it a lot. I like the Beatles though, so I would say this is not a movie for people that don't like the Beatles or that are not at least somewhat familiar with the Beatles already. I had seen several documentaries already about the Beatles. I've heard all their albums, all the singles, past masters albums, and but I think in the late '90s or so there was the Beatles anthology series, which was kind of an album set, but also this film series about the Beatles, their entire career, not just the end, like this movie. And I think that's a much better overview of the Beatles, a little more accessible if you're not already familiar with all their career points and albums and so on. So I would say go to that first if you do want to try a Beatles documentary. And then just recently, before watching Get Back, I decided to watch 8 Days a Week, which I had never seen, which is the Ron Howard one. Came out like 5 or 6 years ago. And then also I watched Let It Be, which I don't think it's available on DVD or Blu-ray, but I found it online. Anyways, I didn't care for either of those as much. I think because 8 Days a Week covers a lot of the material that's in Beatles Anthology, and Let It Be, the film quality is pretty bad. There's no kind of story, and now that I've seen Get Back, I feel like it covers all the material in Let It Be. So I would just skip Let It Be. I would say just watch Beatles Anthology, listen to their albums, and then if you want more, then go to Get Back. Okay, so here we are, Get Back. Let's see what I had to say. So what I kind of got about from this movie, and I liked it a lot. I did like it because first it looks so much better than the film and Let It Be, the film footage that I saw anyways. And I've heard that they're going to restore that too. I don't know why, but the film footage in this is amazing. It just looks so good. And I'm sure there's a lot of computers responsibility for that, but it is beautiful to look at. It looks just so crisp and amazing. Yeah, it's pretty incredible. And but I found it interesting, the whole series, because it just really gave you. I feel like I even though I'd seen those other documentaries, that I understand the characters of who these guys are way better, and that like I was closer to their personalities than I'd ever seen in any other interviews or anything like that. It just feels so much more raw. And they weren't always, I mean, they were obviously aware of the cameras, and some of them dealt with it better than others, but it's just, it's pretty amazing. I kind of was impressed at how the movie really shows how their songwriting process worked, because a lot of the songs, Get Back, For You Blue, that George Harrison song, Ringo was working on Octopus's Garden. All these songs are coming in these just tiny fragments, and sometimes we get to hear how they came into being. Like George was saying, like I was watching some BBC program where they were doing a waltz or something in 3/4 time, so it kind of got him in that mode for writing a song. So things like that, I thought it was fascinating. You kind of get to see, if you just look at their albums, like the credits either go to Lennon, McCartney, Harrison, or sometimes Ringo. But I was impressed that they each kind of take whatever song it is, and there's not even like a question of like, do I like this song or not? It's just like they get behind it and they try, like each of them will try singing it. You get a lot of alternative vocals, because songs that you think of as belonging to one Beatle, they'll like, one of them steps out. Paul goes to a meeting at one point and they like let John sing the vocals, and it didn't work as well, but sometimes there were some interesting choices, and yeah, just a lot of the cohesion of them as a band. Like when they take on a song, they really try and make it a Beatles song, and sometimes that leads to arguments. There's a few arguments in this, but I think overall they just want to make the song as good as possible. So I thought that was interesting. You just kind of see these kind of larval versions of not just the songs, but also the movie. Like throughout this, they're trying to figure out what is this leading to? What is this going towards? And it leads to the rooftop concert, of course, but you know how it ends and how these songs are finalized on the album, but you're just kind of like, how are they going to get there? And that's kind of a fascinating process. They refer to Brian Epstein at one point, and he had died, like a year or two before, I think, and they refer to him as Mr. Epstein, which I thought was kind of incredible because he was like their manager, right? So they just still refer to him as Mr. Epstein. They still have that kind of level of seeing him as that kind of parental figure that kind of led and organized the band. And that they talk about how that after his death, that kind of led to this kind of directionless to their path. Like, what do they do next? Now, some things I didn't like about this film, the editing, was the style of, especially in the early parts, there's like a lot of quick cuts and kind of a modern YouTube style of editing, which is where you just do these, you got to constantly be moving the camera, and it felt a little out of place for 1969. That kind of thing was a little annoying, but also they didn't always have, I think, the film footage for when people are talking. So what they do is they cut in these scenes with that character and their lips are moving, but they're out of sync, which is a little annoying too. But I understand they were working with the constraints of the film they had and so on. It was really a big editing project for Peter Jackson. He's not directing, it's editing. And you work with what you have, but that was a little annoying, but not enough to put me off the movie. Also, I was thinking about the song Across the Universe, which David Bowie covered on Young Americans, and how Bowie's version seemed, when I heard it, like so different from the original Beatles version. But then in this movie, and actually in Let It Be, and maybe in here too, there is kind of a funkier, I mean, the thing is they do this with almost every song. They play it in different ways and try it on in different styles and different speeds. And I think one of them definitely sounded more closer to Bowie's version. I could see maybe Bowie saw it and said, hey, that's a pretty cool way to do that song. The part where Paul comes in with Get Back, like the idea, he said, like, this is how the song is. And I want to say John wasn't there when he starts, but then as he teaches it to George and Ringo, later they're already playing it, and John comes in late that morning and he just picks up his guitar and starts playing with them, which I thought was just, I don't know, to me that was like one of the magical moments. Like, there's a lot of moments like that in the movie. I was amazed to learn that Paul had never seen The Wizard of Oz. I didn't realize that Ringo and George could each play a little piano. I guess they all could to some degree. There's a lot of songs that show up that aren't on Let It Be, but are singles that are on Past Masters Volume 2, and songs that would be on Abbey Road, songs that would be on All Things Must Pass, the first post-Beatles George Harrison song, songs that would be on, I think, Plastic Ono Band or Imagine. And there's a song they call Road to Marrakesh, but it's actually Jealous Guy. It's that melody, but the lyrics completely changed. So things like that are just, you can see that they each have at this point the ability to write their own songs and not really need to collaborate. They're that powerful, but at the same time they do want to finish this project. So you can understand why the Beatles broke up. I mean, it's not a total surprise. And from this movie, like, everybody would talk about how Yoko Ono was the one that broke. They even joke about that and saying like 50 years because Yoko sat on an amp, which is hilarious because like they didn't wait 50 years. As soon as the Beatles broke up, they started blaming her, and it's only now, 50 years later, that she kind of gets vindicated. From this though, I heard that Ringo left the band for like 3 weeks before Let It Be at some point. But from this footage, Get Back sessions, it seemed like George was the least satisfied and the most wanting to break out. John and Paul, I mean, they were wearied by the process, you get that, but they're still trying to make it work, whereas George seems, he does quit. That's like one of the hooks in the chapters in this movie, is that George quits at one point, or he just goes home. And we don't know exactly what happens. That's something I thought about, like, how would this be different nowadays? That seems like such a thing that if it happened in a documentary nowadays, it'd be like, oh, that's staged. This thing's called Get Back. It's somebody leaves, and then comes back, right? So that if it happened nowadays, I'd be like, that's totally a fake plot point that they just threw in there to end an episode and keep it as a cliffhanger. But I think it was genuine at the time. They go to visit George at his house or at Ringo's house or something. And I was thinking this is the type of thing that nowadays, if they were making this nowadays, what they would do is they would have camera people follow the individual Beatles as they went home, showing their home life, because people want to see as much as possible about that. They want to know every little intimate detail, and they would have loved to see that the first attempt to bring George back and the second attempt, which was more successful. What this felt like, though, a lot of times, the comparison I was making in my mind was that if you see movies that are adapted from Shakespeare plays, they're movies and they have modern sensibilities. Like, think of Titus, that one with Anthony Hopkins, or there's all kinds of modernized Shakespeare that is, if Shakespeare saw it, he'd be like, what is this? This is nothing like my vision. And I think that's kind of like what we see with this modernizing of the past through editing. There's one scene that is very strange. I mean, you agree to be part of this documentary about the making of this, and John and Paul go to lunch. I think it's to talk about George leaving, and apparently there was a microphone in the flower pot recording them, like very Watergate type of stuff. Like, what is that about? Like, I wonder how Paul feels about that, like when he learned that, oh, by the way, we just decided to record you without your permission. But all these conversations and a lot of the plot points, I mean, they don't even mention in Let It Be, that movie, that George left. I mean, that's such a crucial part of the story, but Let It Be just has no kind of narrative frame. It's just basically film. There's a lot of playfulness. I like the scene a lot with Peter Sellers. I guess they were getting ready to film the movie The Magic Christian, which Ringo would play a role in, and that's kind of the impetus behind why they have to rush things along, because Ringo's going to be on a filming schedule and he's got to be there. So they're trying to get this concert or whatever it is it's building towards ready, and they have this little sit together with Peter Sellers, and Peter Sellers is one of the great actors, I think. If you look at Doctor Strangelove and Lolita, he plays multiple characters in those movies, and those are two of his best roles, I think. And so he just, but in real life, he's just so quiet and kind of like, and he has this great line when he sits down. He says, "What are we discussing at this moment?" Which is just such a great catchphrase. But seeing John, who seems like he's high all the time, I mean, I wouldn't know, but they're constantly drinking, smoking, drinking at least coffee, but a lot of wine, beer, doing drugs. They're just, you get the impression that they're nonstop on something. It's just so great, though, to see these songs come into being. I was thinking, like, what would be more like certain moments in musical history, like if you had been able to see Beethoven write the Fifth Symphony and come up with the dun 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 part, like if you could like be talking with somebody and say like, okay, how's this gonna go? Dun 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 dun. No, that's not quite right. Dun 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 dun. No, that's not it. Dun 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 dun. Oh, like if you could be there at that moment, and there's moments like that in this movie when you see them writing this song, they're like struggling to get it right. There's a sense that they're also, especially on film, and I think George seems the least comfortable on film. Ringo and John seem they love the camera, they really play to it. Paul just seems like he wants to be the center of attention, but he's not really like an actor the way they are. So, but they are trying to outcool each other constantly, but also seem like they're not trying to do that, which would be uncool. And I think that's part of that dynamic is what makes the songwriting so fascinating, because they're trying to constantly make it a little better than the other guys. So when they were free of that and they had their own independent albums and so on, it was like liberating at first because they can do whatever they want, but then after like a few years they all kind of not burnt out, but they were just doing less interesting music. They did have some successes after that, I'm not arguing that, but I'm saying like they kind of got it out of their system that, hey, we can do whatever we want, but they're kind of missing that that push and pull between each other. There's these two women that are waiting outside the studio that just are there to see the Beatles arrive, and Paul looks at them in an interesting way, and then they say, which one do you like the most? And she goes, oh, it's just Paul I'm here for. There's also a lot of reading about themselves in these like tabloids or newspapers or whatever they are, and there's one point which it's like right after, I think it may have been the day or the day after that George returns after their big argument, and Paul, for whatever reason, reads this article almost word for word. He alters some phrases, but he reads it in this slow, really obnoxious voice. He just goes on and on. You keep expecting one of the other Beatles to tell him to shut up, but I feel like at that point, maybe that was like the breaking point, and George is like, why did I come back? And that, in my head, that's what I'm imagining, and I think that may have been the end of the Beatles, is Paul reading that annoying article. Yoko is constantly in the room, and a lot of other people make appearances, but Yoko's most consistently there. George Harrison has like some guy just sitting on the floor for quite a while, just kind of meditating and watching them, which is... It was definitely, everybody clearly had their own vision of what this was supposed to be. Billy Preston's arrival, he did a lot of the keyboard work, I think they seem more excited and interesting. I think that's what they thrive on is, new experiences and new interactions, but when they have to do the same song over and over and over and over again, it just wears them out, obviously. I think it would anyone. And but Billy Preston's arrival they do seem happier. It's like one of the few parts that George seems to be smiling. They talk about Bob Dylan joining the Beatles, things like that. There's a lot of great stuff they look back on just a few years before when they went to India, like 67 or whenever that was. And it's fascinating because it was just 2 years earlier, but it seems so long ago in their lives. I guess when you're constantly filmed like that and the world is watching you, every moment, every decision you make is like history in some sense. A lot of the songs in development never get played the same way twice. They're drinking at one point and John kind of like pretends that he's eating the microphone. He uses Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream, kind of incorporates that into the song. There's one part where Ringo comes in with the kernel of Octopus's Garden, which would be on Abbey Road, and it reminded me a lot of when George came in with whatever it was, For You Blue, or one of George's songs. He comes in, but George didn't have all the pieces of it together, so he kind of looked to Paul and John for help. And the same thing happens with Ringo. He says, I've got this song about an octopus in a garden, and that's all I've got. And then George is like, well, why don't you do this? And he kind of structures the entire song. It's interesting that George, has no credit on the song. It's just credited as a Ringo song. And I think that's whatever, corporate reason they decided to do that and just divide the songs in these ways. It's not always accurate because George clearly structured a lot of Octopus's Garden, for example. As they're trying to figure out, should it be on the roof, the concert, that's another one of these kind of attractor points that you see it coming, it's going to happen, but you're like, who's going to make the suggestion? Unfortunately, they don't really make the suggestion on film. It's kind of just alluded to off film, but that would have been amazing if Paul said, why don't we do it in the road? Or like Ringo, why don't we do it on the roof? Another example of editing that I thought was funny that I'm pretty sure was not, this is the kind of thing you have no idea the sense of time and the accuracy of it is, but Yoko sings at various points, and I don't know if singing is the right word, she kind of howls into the microphone, and it's one of the days when, or maybe it isn't, who knows, they make it look though like Paul McCartney's kid, who's, I don't know how old, 5 years old or something, is in the studio at the time, and when Yoko's singing, they kind of show her face, and she's like, and that's the kind of editing, like, you don't know if that was the moment when that kid made that face. Seeing their clothes was really interesting too. George had some interesting shoe choices, and somehow that led to the song Old Brown Shoe, and he's talking about like, I just want a pair of black shoes, and I feel bad for George because apparently the only shoes he can get are these Tricks the Rabbit style flamboyant shoes that look like they're from the future. So they agree to have some shopkeeper come up with size 8 shoes to fit him up. And then I realized, he's writing this song at the same time, Old Brown Shoe. George really has an interest in shoes or something at this point. But in terms of clothes too, look at how the Beatles are dressed compared to all the studio people. A lot of them were wearing ties and looking just way different culture. You can see more like an office the execs and the people behind the Beatles. Don't Let Me Down becomes a B-side, which is kind of amazing. I think it's a great song. There's a great scene where Ringo talks, he just says, "I fought it." Paul seems to have lice, he's constantly itching his hair. When the cops finally arrive to get the Beatles off the roof, what I love about it is, I think police, don't quote me on this, but I think police, if they're in a public space, you can film them without their permission. Is that right? Anyways, that guy is in the movie. Maybe he signed a waiver, I don't know. And he's in both Let It Be and this Get Back version, or several cops. But one of them is pretty young. Like he seems like he's about the Beatles age, so it's kind of funny. And I feel he must be, like, in his family and his acquaintances, he must be like known as the least cool person in all history. When they're performing on the roof too, there's I don't think they know all the lyrics, so there's this guy at one point holding the lyrics. They don't even have a music stand, they just have this guy kneeling and holding the lyrics. I thought it was hilarious. The cops get up on the roof, and when they notice the cops, in some ways they know it's going to be one of their last songs, so they kind of bleed over into the next song and don't stop playing, but they just play really aggressively and wildly. You can tell that they know this is the end. And they turn off George's amp or something, and then I thought that was one of the coolest moments in the movie for George, is that he turns the amp back on. He's like, "I'm gonna keep playing," and then they get back down and they play some of the music in the studio, and somebody says something like, "Well, it was a good dry run for a concert or something else," and I'm just watching George's eyes and thinking in his head he's probably like, "Fuck no, I'm not doing that." And there was an idea at one point, I think Paul had it, that they kind of do a little nightclub performance with a small audience. I thought that would have been good because it's winter. What's the idea of doing it on top of this rooftop in the cold of winter, disturbing the peace? It was kind of a bad choice, and it might have been iconic and cool. And they say that's something like at that point, like they're just up there for some scenery and stuff, which. Okay, but I think a nightclub scene might have been a little better. So yeah, that's I think all I have to say more or less about this movie. It was cool to watch them come up. I think it's interesting if you're interested in songwriting and music production and stuff like that, because I've been learning a lot of that stuff, and the things they do with vocals and playing with vocals and different sounds is something I'm doing. So I enjoy that. I have no idea what other people think of this movie, and I have no idea if they'll enjoy it. But I thought it was great. I don't know if I'll ever watch it again, but I thought it was cool. Yeah, it changed my perspective on some things about the Beatles, even though I'm pretty familiar with them, and I do recommend it. So check it out. Get Back, another 9-hour, no, it's like 8 hours, epic, but it's an epic-sized film trilogy from Peter Jackson. I think maybe I can compare it to Lord of the Rings. I saw that original trilogy, but I barely cared about them, and they don't interest me at all. So I'm never going to watch the expanded edition. So I think if you haven't made it through the Beatles albums and the Beatles anthology videos, if you want more at that point, then come to this. But otherwise, don't make this your 24-hour Lord of the Rings expanded edition first attempt at the Beatles.